The bullet shattered the window of the mercantile just as Violet Warren reached for a bolt of calico fabric. And she knew in that instant her past had finally caught up with her in Canon City, Colorado. Glass rained down around her shoulders as she dropped to the floor, her heart hammering against her ribs while screams erupted throughout the store. She had been foolish to think 6 months would be enough time, foolish to believe the Garrett gang would simply forget what she had witnessed that night in Dodge City. Through the jagged window frame, she caught sight of 3 riders sitting motionless in the street, their faces shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats, but she recognized the posture of revenge when she saw it. The year was 1878, and Canon City had seemed like salvation when she first arrived on the stage from Kansas, a place where the Arkansas River cut through red rock canyons, and the mountains rose up like protective walls against the eastern plains. She had taken work as a seamstress, kept her head down, and tried to build something resembling a normal life. But normal was a luxury women like her could not afford, not when they had seen a territorial judge murdered in cold blood by outlaws who thought themselves above the law. "Everyone stay down." The shopkeeper's voice trembled as he crouched behind his counter, but Violet was already moving, crawling toward the back door on her hands and knees. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, falling across her face as she navigated around overturned display tables and scattered merchandise. She had to get out, had to run, because staying meant dying, and she had not survived 22 years on this earth just to let Jack Garrett and his brothers put a bullet in her back. She burst through the rear entrance into the alley, her green cotton dress catching on a nail and tearing as she stumbled into the bright June sunlight. The sound of boots hitting the boardwalk out front told her the riders had dismounted. They would be coming for her now, and Canon City's marshal was 3 buildings away, too far to reach before they cut her down in the street. Violet ran. Her button-up boots slipped on loose gravel as she rounded the corner, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The smell of horse manure and dust filled her nostrils, mixing with the ever-present scent of the nearby Arkansas River. She could hear shouting behind her now, rough voices calling her name, promising to make it quick if she just stopped running. But she had heard their promises before, had heard them promise the judge a fair word before they shot him through the heart. She nearly collided with a man leading a bay horse down the side street. Whoa there! His hands caught her shoulders, steadying her before she could fall. Violet looked up into a face weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of river stone and a strong jaw covered in a few days' worth of dark stubble. He was tall, perhaps 25 years old, wearing a dusty trail coat over a blue shirt and denim trousers. A Colt revolver sat on his right hip, well worn but well maintained. "What's got you running like the devil's on your heels, please?" The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "Please, they are going to kill me." His expression shifted immediately, the easygoing concern hardening into something sharp and focused. He glanced past her shoulder toward the main street where the sound of heavy footsteps was growing louder. "Who's after you?" "The Garrett gang. I witnessed them murder Judge Hamilton in Dodge City last winter. They have been hunting me ever since." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "Judge Hamilton, I heard about that." His gray eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch despite her terror. "How many of them?" "3, maybe 4. I saw 3 riders, but Jack Garrett usually has at least one more man watching his back." "Get behind me." It was not a request but a command, spoken in a tone that expected obedience. When Violet hesitated, he moved her himself, positioning his body between her and the approaching danger while keeping hold of his horse's reins. "Stay close and stay quiet. You do not understand. They will kill you too. They will kill anyone who gets in their way." He turned his head slightly, not enough to take his eyes off the street, but enough that she could see the grim determination on his face. "Then I guess they are going to have to try." 3 men rounded the corner, spreading out in a loose formation as soon as they spotted their quarry. Jack Garrett stood in the middle, his long face twisted with the kind of casual cruelty that came naturally to men who had spent years taking what they wanted. His brothers flanked him, younger but no less dangerous, their hands hovering near their weapons. "Well now." Jack's voice carried the drawl of Missouri mixed with years of trail dust. "Looks like our little witness found herself a protector. That's real touching, friend, but this does not concern you. The lady and us have some unfinished business." The cowboy did not move, did not even shift his weight. "I reckon any business you have with the lady concerns me now. You boys should mount up and ride out while you still can." Jack laughed, a sound like gravel scraping against wood. "You hear that? He's giving us a chance to leave. That is mighty generous of you, cowboy." "Why do not you tell us your name so we know who we are burying?" Asher Dalton. "And I am not the one who needs to worry about burial today." Violet's fingers clutched at the back of Asher's coat, her mind racing through possibilities and finding nothing but dead ends. She had brought this on him, this stranger who had shown her kindness for no reason other than it was the right thing to do. "Please," she whispered urgently, "just let me go with them. I will not have your death on my conscience. You will not face them alone." Asher spoke without looking back at her, his attention fixed on the 3 men blocking their path. "That is a promise, Miss Warren." How did he know her name? She had not told him, but there was no time to wonder because Jack Garrett's expression had shifted from amused to annoyed. "Last chance, Dalton. Walk away now and we will forget we ever saw you. Hell, we might even thank you for finding her for us. Here is my counter-offer." Asher's voice remained level, almost conversational. "You turn around, ride out of Canon City, and pray I do not see your faces again. Because if I do, I will hunt every last one of you down and bring you to justice for Judge Hamilton's murder." The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Violet could see the calculation in Jack Garrett's eyes, weighing the odds, measuring the man standing before him. Whatever he saw made him reconsider the quick draw because his expression shifted again, this time to something that looked almost like respect. "You know who we are, Dalton. I know Jack Garrett is wanted in 4 territories for robbery and murder. I know his brothers Illy and Samuel have enough warrants between them to paper a saloon. And I know that judge you killed had a wife and 3 daughters who will never see him again." Illy Garrett, the youngest brother, spat into the dust. High-minded talk from a nobody cowboy with a death wish. But Jack held up a hand, stilling his brother's aggression. "You are either very brave or very stupid, Dalton. I have not decided which yet." He tilted his head slightly, studying Asher with renewed interest. "Maybe both, but I will tell you what. We will give you until sundown to reconsider your position. After that, the girl dies and anyone standing with her dies too. That is a promise I intend to keep." Before Asher could respond, Jack and his brothers backed away, moving with the practiced ease of men who had walked away from confrontations many times before. They did not holster their weapons, did not turn their backs, but they withdrew nonetheless, disappearing around the corner and leaving Violet and Asher alone in the side street. Violet's legs nearly gave out as the terror and adrenaline drained from her body all at once. Asher turned just in time to catch her elbow, keeping her upright with a firm but gentle grip. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the small scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the way his dark hair curled slightly where it touched his collar. "Easy now." His voice had lost its hard edge, softening into something that made her chest tighten in an entirely different way. "You are safe for the moment." "Safe?" She almost laughed at the absurdity of the word. "You just made yourself a target. They will come for both of us now." "Then we best make sure we are ready for them." He released her arm and glanced around the street, his mind clearly working through strategies and scenarios. "You got somewhere you can stay, somewhere defensible." "I have a room above the dress shop on 3rd Street, but I cannot ask you to." "You are not asking. I am offering." He met her eyes again, and she felt that strange flutter in her chest once more. "Name's Asher Dalton, in case you missed that part. I run a small ranch about 10 miles north of town, but I was in Canon City picking up supplies when I heard the shot. Figured somebody needed help. Violet Warren." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "And I am sorry you heard that shot." Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. "I am not." He gathered his horse's reins and gestured down the street. "Come on. We need to talk to Marshal Brennan before those boys decide sundown is too long to wait." The marshal's office sat on the corner of Main Street and 2nd. A sturdy adobe building with iron bars on the windows, and a reputation for no-nonsense justice. Marshal Brennan himself was in his 50s, with silver hair and a paunch that spoke of too many years behind a desk, but his eyes were sharp as he listened to Violet's story. "Judge Hamilton." He leaned back in his chair, making it creak under his weight. "I remember when word came through about his murder. Whole territory was up in arms about it." His gaze shifted to Violet, assessing. "You really see it happen?" "I was working as a maid at the hotel where he was staying. I brought fresh towels to his room and walked in just as Jack Garrett pulled the trigger." The memory made her stomach turn, the sound of the gunshot still echoing in her nightmares. "The judge looked right at me before he fell. Then Jack turned and I ran. I have been running ever since." Brennan drummed his fingers on his desk. "And you did not think to report this to the law?" "I reported it to the sheriff in Dodge City the next morning. 3 days later, someone set fire to the boarding house where I was staying. I barely made it out with my life." Violet's hands clenched in her lap. "I realized then that reporting what I saw just painted a target on my back. So I ran and kept running, hoping distance would keep me alive." The marshal grunted, clearly not entirely satisfied with that answer but understanding the logic behind it. "And now they have found you here." "Now I have found her here." Asher spoke for the first time since they had entered the office. "And they have given us until sundown to hand her over, which we will not be doing." Brennan said it as a statement rather than a question. "I do not negotiate with outlaws, and I will not let them terrorize witnesses in my town." He stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "But I will be honest with you both. I have got 2 deputies and not enough men to mount a proper defense if the Garrett gang decides to make a real fight of it. Best I can do is lock Miss Warren in one of the cells for protection, and hope that discourages them from trying anything stupid." Violet felt her heart sink. A jail cell. After months of running, months of looking over her shoulder and jumping at shadows, her protection would come in the form of iron bars and a locked door. It was not freedom, but it was survival, and she had learned long ago that sometimes survival was the best you could hope for. Asher, however, shook his head. "With respect, Marshal, that is exactly what they will expect. Jack Garrett is not stupid. He knows the first place you will stash a witness is in your jail. All they need to do is wait until dark, create a distraction, and come through that back door like it is made of paper." Brennan bristled. "You got a better idea, Dalton. My ranch. 10 miles out, defensible position on high ground with clear sightlines in every direction. They want her, they will have to come across open country where we can see them from a mile away." The marshal considered this, his weathered face creasing with thought. "That puts you square in the line of fire." "I am already in the line of fire." Asher glanced at Violet and something passed between them, an unspoken understanding that made her pulse quicken. "They threatened her life. That makes it my business now." Violet found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "Why? Why would you risk everything for someone you just met?" Asher was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes holding hers with an intensity that made the rest of the room seem to fade away. "Because I know what it is like to have nowhere to turn. Because I know what it is like when the people who should protect you fail to do their job. And because letting Jack Garrett put a bullet in an innocent woman is not something I could live with." There was a story behind those words, a history of pain and loss that Violet could hear in the carefully controlled tone of his voice. But before she could ask, Marshal Brennan cleared his throat. "All right. Here is what we are going to do. Dalton, you take Miss Warren out to your ranch. Go now, in broad daylight, and make sure anybody watching sees you leave. I will spread word around town that she is under my protection and staying in the jail. With any luck, the Garrett gang will waste their time watching my office while you two hole up somewhere safe." "And when they figure out the deception," Violet asked, "then you better hope Dalton here is as good a shot as his reputation suggests." Brennan moved to a cabinet behind his desk and pulled out a Winchester rifle, handing it across to Asher. "Extra ammunition is in the bag. You see any riders approaching your place, you shoot first and ask questions never." "Understood." Asher took the rifle with a nod of thanks, checking the action with practiced ease before slinging it over his shoulder. "What about you, Marshal?" "They come looking for answers. They are going to want to talk to you. Let them come. I will be ready." Brennan's expression hardened into something that reminded Violet he had not kept his badge all these years by being soft. "Now get going before somebody spots you standing around my office." The ride out of Canon City felt surreal to Violet, sitting behind Asher on his bay horse with her arms wrapped around his waist, and the afternoon sun beating down on her uncovered head. She had left her bonnet in the mercantile along with any pretense of normalcy. Everything she owned was back in her rented room, her clothes and sewing supplies and the few precious items she had managed to carry with her from Kansas. All of it abandoned now, probably lost forever. But she was alive, and that counted for something. Asher rode with the easy confidence of a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle, guiding the horse along the dusty road that followed the Arkansas River north out of town. The landscape here was striking in its harshness, red rock formations rising up from the earth like ancient sentinels while scrub, brush, and cottonwoods clung to life, wherever water touched the ground. In the distance, the Sangre de Cristo Mountains formed a jagged line against the blue sky, their peaks still holding patches of snow despite the summer heat. "How long have you lived out here?" Violet asked, more to break the silence than from any real curiosity, though she found herself genuinely wanting to know about the man who had just upended his life to protect hers. "About 3 years now. Bought the property from a prospector who decided mining was not for him and went back east." Asher's voice rumbled in his chest, vibrating against her cheek where it pressed against his back. "It is not much, just a small herd of cattle and some horses, but it is mine, first thing I have ever owned outright." "You were not born in Colorado then?" "Texas. Grew up outside San Antonio working my father's ranch." There was a long pause, filled only with the steady clip-clop of the horse's hooves and the rush of the river beside them. "He died when I was 17. Rustlers hit us in the night, killed him and 3 of our hands. I tracked them for 2 weeks before I found their camp." Violet felt her breath catch. "What did you do?" "What needed doing." The words were flat, emotionless, but she could hear the weight of old pain beneath them. Brought them back to San Antonio to stand trial. They hanged inside a month. He shifted slightly in the saddle. After that, I could not stay. Everywhere I looked, I saw my father's ghost, so I sold the ranch, took what money I could, and headed north looking for a fresh start. I am sorry. The words felt inadequate, but they were all she had. That is just life in the West. People die. Land changes hands. You keep moving forward or you die too. He glanced back over his shoulder at her, and she saw something in his expression that had not been there before, a softness that gentled the hard lines of his face. But I reckon you know something about that, running like you have been. I never wanted to run. Violet's arms tightened around his waist involuntarily. I wanted to do the right thing, to make sure Judge Hamilton's killers faced justice, but the system does not protect people like me. I am just a seamstress, a nobody with no family and no connections. Who is going to believe my word over men with guns and money? I believe you. Asher said it simply, as though it was the most natural thing in the world, and I figure that counts for something. It did count. It counted more than Violet could put into words, this stranger's faith in her honesty when so many others had turned away. She found herself studying the back of his head, the way his dark hair curled against his collar, the set of his broad shoulders beneath the trail coat. He was handsome in a rough, weathered way that spoke of hard work and harder living, but it was more than that. There was something solid about him, something steady that made her feel safer than she had felt in months. They rode in companionable silence for a while longer before the road curved away from the river and began climbing into the foothills. The terrain grew rockier here, dotted with juniper and pinyon pine that filled the air with their sharp, clean scent. Violet could see why Asher had chosen this location for his ranch. From higher ground, you could spot trouble coming from miles away, and the rocky landscape would make it difficult for riders to approach unseen. The ranch itself came into view as they crested a rise, a simple but well-maintained homestead nestled in a small valley with a creek running through it. The main house was built of logs and adobe, with a covered porch facing east toward the mountains. A barn stood nearby, its red paint faded by sun and weather, and a sturdy corral held a half-dozen horses that nickered in greeting as they approached. Everything spoke of a man who took pride in his property, who worked hard and made do with what he had. It is not fancy. Asher dismounted and reached up to help Violet down, his hands strong and sure around her waist as he lifted her from the horse. But it is defensible, and it has got good water from the creek. We can hold out here as long as we need to. Violet's boots touched the ground, but Asher's hands lingered at her waist for a moment longer than necessary, his gray eyes searching her face as though trying to read her thoughts. She felt heat rise in her cheeks despite the seriousness of their situation, an awareness of him as a man rather than just a protector flooding through her with startling intensity. "Thank you." She managed to keep her voice steady. "For everything. I know you did not have to do this. Maybe not." His hands dropped away, but he did not step back, leaving them standing close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. "But I wanted to. From the moment I saw you running, I knew I could not let anything happen to you." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning that neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Then Asher cleared his throat and stepped back, breaking the moment as he turned to lead his horse toward the barn. "Come on. Let me show you around before those outlaws figure out where we went." The interior of the house was simple but clean, with a main room that served as kitchen and living space combined, a smaller bedroom off to one side, and a loft accessible by a ladder that Asher explained he used for storage. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and windows on 3 sides provided good visibility of the surrounding terrain. Violet noticed immediately that Asher had positioned his furniture with defense in mind, keeping clear sightlines to all the windows and doors. "You can have the bedroom." Asher set the Winchester rifle by the door and began checking his other weapons, a second revolver and a shotgun he pulled from a cabinet near the fireplace. "I will bunk out here where I can keep watch on the approaches." Violet started to protest, to say she could not take his bed, but the look on his face told her arguing would be pointless. Besides, exhaustion was beginning to catch up with her now that the immediate danger had passed. She had not slept well in weeks, always on edge, always listening for footsteps in the night. "At least let me help you prepare." She moved to the kitchen area, noting the supplies stacked on the shelves. "When did you last eat?" Asher paused in his weapon check, seeming to consider the question. "Breakfast, I think. Maybe earlier." "Then I will make us both something. If we are going to stand against the Garrett gang, we need our strength." She found flour and lard and began mixing biscuit dough, falling into the familiar rhythm of cooking the way another woman might seek comfort in prayer. Her mother had taught her to bake before the fever took her when Violet was 12, and there was something soothing about the simple, honest work of feeding someone. Asher watched her for a moment, then went back to his preparations, loading ammunition and positioning supplies near the windows. They worked in silence, two strangers thrown together by violence and circumstance, yet moving around each other with surprising ease. Violet found herself hyper-aware of his presence, the way he moved with economical grace, the quiet competence in everything he did. "Can I ask you something?" She shaped the dough into rounds and set them on a baking sheet. "In town, when you promised I would not face them alone, why did you say it like that?" Asher was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he set down the box of cartridges he had been handling and turned to face her fully. "When my father died, I was alone. My mother had passed years before, and I had no siblings, no other family to speak of. The neighbors came around, offered their condolences, but when it came down to it, I faced those rustlers by myself. I tracked them alone, brought them in alone, and dealt with the aftermath alone." His jaw tightened. "It is a particular kind of hell, facing down evil with no one standing beside you. I swore after that I would never let someone else go through what I went through if I could help it." Violet's hands stilled in her work, her heart clenching at the pain in his voice. "You are a good man, Asher Dalton. I am just a man." But he met her eyes and something flickered in his expression, something warm that made her stomach flutter. "And right now, I am a man who is glad he was in town today when you needed help." The biscuits baked while they finished securing the house, filling the small space with the comforting smell of fresh bread. Violet prepared beans and bacon to go with them, using supplies from Asher's well-stocked pantry, and by the time the sun began its descent toward the mountains, they sat down to eat at his small wooden table. "This is good." Asher spoke around a mouthful of biscuit, genuine appreciation in his voice. "Better than anything I have made in months. Cooking for one is never as satisfying as cooking for two." Violet surprised herself with the observation, the domesticity of it feeling strange after so many months of running and hiding. "I have missed having someone to feed." "You have been alone a long time then, since I was 17. My mother died when I was 12, like I mentioned. My father lasted another 5 years before his heart gave out. After that, I supported myself with sewing and maid work, whatever I could find." She poked at her beans with her fork. "It is not much of a life, but it was mine, or it was until I walked into that hotel room in Dodge City." Asher reached across the table, his hand covering hers where it rested beside her plate, The touch was warm, solid, anchoring her to the present moment. "We will get through this, I promise you that. You should not make promises you cannot keep." But she did not pull her hand away. "Then it is a good thing I only make promises I intend to keep." They finished their meal as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, the last light catching on the distant mountains and turning them the deep red that gave them their name. Sangre de Cristo, blood of Christ. Violet wondered if there would be blood spilled here too, if this beautiful place would become another killing ground in her desperate flight from justice. Night fell with the sudden completeness it always did in the high country, the temperature dropping as stars emerged in their thousands across the black vault of sky. Asher extinguished the lamps and they sat in darkness, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the horses moving in the corral, the creek burbling over stones, the wind sighing through the pines. "You should try to sleep." Asher spoke from his position by the window, his silhouette barely visible against the starlight. "I will keep watch. Will they really come tonight? I do not know. Jack Garrett said sundown, but he could have meant that as a deadline for us to hand you over, not necessarily when he would attack." She heard him shift, the creak of the floorboards under his boots. "But I am not taking any chances." Violet rose from the chair where she had been sitting, moving across the dark room until she stood beside him at the window. "Then, let me keep watch with you." "You cannot stay awake all night by yourself." "Violet, no." She cut him off with more force than she intended. "You have already done so much for me. Let me do this one small thing. We can take shifts and that way we both get some rest." She could feel his gaze on her face even though she could not see his eyes in the darkness. Then he nodded, a barely perceptible movement. "All right, I will take first watch. You sleep for a few hours and I will wake you when I need a break." It was a compromise, and they both knew she had won the larger point. Violet felt a small surge of satisfaction as she made her way to the bedroom, closing the door behind her and standing for a moment in the complete darkness. Asher's bed was a simple affair, a rope frame with a feather mattress and rough blankets that smelled of sage and wood smoke and something distinctly masculine. She removed her boots and her torn dress, standing in her chemise and petticoat before sliding beneath the covers. Sleep should have been impossible given the circumstances, but exhaustion claimed her almost immediately, dragging her down into dreams of gunshots and gray eyes and hands that caught her before she fell. She woke to Asher's hand on her shoulder, gentle but insistent, and for a moment could not remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back and she sat up quickly, her heart racing. "Easy." His voice was low, soothing in the darkness. "Nothing is wrong. But it has been 4 hours and I need you to take over the watch while I rest." Violet's eyes adjusted enough to make out his form sitting on the edge of the bed, his face haggard with tiredness. "Has there been any sign of them?" "No. Either they have not figured out where we went yet, or they are waiting for a better opportunity." He stood, swaying slightly. "The Winchester is by the main window. You see any movement at all, any riders or lights, you wake me immediately. Understood?" "I understand." She rose from the bed, suddenly very aware that she was standing in her undergarments in the dark with a man she had met only hours before. But Asher, to his credit, kept his eyes on her face and made no mention of her state of undress. "There is coffee on the stove, still warm. Help yourself." Then he was gone, moving into the main room with the quiet tread of someone who knew how to move in darkness. Violet found her dress and pulled it back on despite the tear, then made her way to the window where the rifle waited. The night outside was peaceful, the stars wheeling slowly overhead in their eternal dance. She could see the darker shapes of the barn and corral, the glint of starlight on the creek water, the empty expanse of the valley stretching away toward the road. Hours passed in silence. Violet found herself thinking about Asher, about the pain in his voice when he spoke of his father, about the way his hands had felt at her waist when he lifted her from the horse. She barely knew him, yet he had become the most important person in her world in the span of a single day. It was absurd, impossible, the stuff of the dime novels she sometimes read when she could afford them. But it was also real. The danger was real, the protection he offered was real, and the feeling growing in her chest every time she looked at him was terrifyingly, wonderfully real. Dawn came slowly, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and lavender. Violet was about to wake Asher when she saw it, a plume of dust rising from the road about 2 miles distant. Riders moving fast, heading straight for the ranch. Her heart lurched into her throat. Asher. He was awake and moving before she finished saying his name, crossing the room in 3 long strides to peer out the window beside her. His hair was mussed from sleep, his shirt hanging open, but his eyes were sharp and focused as he counted the approaching riders. 4 of them, the whole gang. He grabbed the Winchester and checked the load, then handed her his spare revolver. "You know how to use this. My father taught me to shoot bottles when I was young." Her hands trembled as she took the weapon, its weight both foreign and familiar. "But I have never shot at a person." "Hopefully you will not have to." But his tone suggested he was not counting on hope. "Stay away from the windows and keep low. If they breach the house, you aim for center mass and you do not hesitate. Can you do that?" Violet looked at the gun in her hands, then up at Asher's face, seeing the deadly serious intention there. She thought of Judge Hamilton falling, of the months spent running, of the terror that had become her constant companion. She thought of this man who had promised she would not face her enemies alone, who had given up his safety for a stranger. "Yes," her voice came out stronger than she felt. "I can do that." The riders pulled up about 50 yards from the house, staying just out of easy rifle range. Jack Garrett dismounted and cupped his hands around his mouth. "Dalton, we know the woman is in there with you. Send her out and we will let you live. This is your last chance." Asher positioned himself at the window, the Winchester resting on the sill. "You already had your last chance, Garrett. Now you are on my land and I am within my rights to shoot you for trespassing. Turn around and ride out." Jack's laugh carried across the distance. "That is not how this is going to play out, and you know it. We will burn you out if we have to. The woman dies today one way or another." "Then you better start digging graves." Asher's finger tightened on the trigger. "Because I will send every one of you to hell before I let you touch her." Violet crouched beside him, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "There are 4 of them and 2 of us. How can we possibly? We hold the high ground and we have cover. They have to cross open ground to reach us, and I am a damn good shot." He glanced at her, and despite everything, despite the fear and the danger, he smiled. "Trust me," she did. "God help her, she did." Jack Garrett made some signal to his brothers, and they spread out, creating a wide arc that would force Asher to divide his attention between multiple targets. It was a smart tactic, one that spoke of experience in these kinds of situations. They were going to rush the house from different directions, forcing Asher to choose which target to engage while the others closed the distance. "When I start shooting, you watch the back window." Asher's voice was calm, focused. "If anyone tries to circle around, you tell me immediately." Then the Garrett gang spurred their horses forward, and everything happened at once. Asher's first shot took Garrett's horse out from under him, sending the younger brother tumbling into the dust. His second shot clipped Samuel across the shoulder, spinning him around in his saddle. Jack and the 4th man, a Mexican gunfighter Violet did not recognize, split off in different directions, firing their pistols as they rode. Bullets slammed into the log walls with meaty thunks, sending splinters flying. One shattered a window, raining glass across the floor. Violet scrambled backward, her pulse roaring in her ears as Asher worked the Winchester's lever action with mechanical precision, firing and reloading with the smooth efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Back window. Violet shouted as she caught movement through the rear of the house. The Mexican gunfighter had dismounted and was running in a crouch toward the back door. Asher spun, firing from the hip. The shot went wide, but it was close enough to make the gunfighter dive for cover behind the water trough. "Watch him. Do not let him reach that door." Violet raised the revolver with shaking hands, trying to remember her father's lessons about breathing and sight alignment. The gunfighter broke from cover, sprinting the last few yards. She pulled the trigger and the gun bucked in her hands, the report deafening in the enclosed space. The gunfighter went down, clutching his leg and screaming. Violet stared in horror at what she had done, bile rising in her throat. But there was no time to process it because Jack Garrett had reached the porch and was trying to smash through the front door. Asher met him with the shotgun, firing through the door and blowing a hole the size of a dinner plate through the wood. Jack's scream of pain and rage echoed across the valley as he fell back, blood spreading across his chest. Then silence, broken only by the moaning of the wounded and the ringing in Violet's ears from the gunfire. "Stay down." Asher moved to each window in turn, checking for more threats. Outside, Garrett was struggling to his feet, limping badly from where he had fallen from his horse. Samuel was clutching his wounded shoulder, his face pale with shock. Jack lay on the porch, still breathing but unconscious. The Mexican gunfighter had dragged himself behind the water trough and was not moving. "I think they are done." Asher's voice was hoarse, his hands steady despite the violence that had just erupted. "Cover me. I am going to disarm them." "Wait." Violet grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. "What if it is a trick? Then I guess we will find out." But he squeezed her hand reassuringly before pulling away. "Stay inside. Keep that pistol ready." She watched through the broken window as Asher emerged from the house, the Winchester trained on the wounded outlaws. He moved with careful deliberation, kicking away their weapons and checking each man for hidden guns. Garrett tried to lunge at him, and Asher put him down hard with the rifle butt across his jaw. It was over in minutes. 4 dangerous men reduced to bleeding, cursing prisoners bound with rope from the barn. Asher dragged Jack Garrett off the porch, none too gently, and lined all 4 of them up in the yard where he could watch them while he assessed the damage to his property. When he finally came back inside, Violet saw the weariness etched into every line of his face. He had killed men today, or at least wounded them badly enough that some might not survive. That kind of violence left marks that did not show on the outside. "You did good." He set the Winchester aside and reached for her, his hands framing her face with unexpected tenderness. "That shot you took saved both our lives. If that gunfighter had gotten through the back door, this would have ended very differently. I shot a man." Her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. "I actually shot someone. You defended yourself. There is a difference." His thumb stroked along her cheekbone, a gesture of comfort that made her eyes prick with tears. "I know it does not feel like it right now, but what you did was brave and necessary." The tears came then, a release of all the fear and tension that had been building since she first saw those riders in Canon City. Asher pulled her against his chest, and she went willingly, burying her face in his shoulder and letting herself cry for the first time in months. He held her through it, one hand stroking her hair while he murmured reassurances that she could barely hear through her sobs. When the storm passed, she pulled back enough to look up at his face, seeing the concern there mixed with something deeper, something that made her breath catch. Asher. Whatever she had been about to say was lost as he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss, not sweet or tentative, but desperate and claiming and full of all the things they had not said to each other. Violet's hands fisted in his shirt as she kissed him back with equal fervor, tasting dust and gunpowder and something uniquely him. His arms tightened around her waist, lifting her slightly off her feet as he poured everything into that kiss, all the fear and relief and want. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Asher rested his forehead against hers. "I am sorry. That was not, do not you dare apologize." Violet's hands moved to his face, holding him when he would have pulled away. "I've been wanting you to do that since you lifted me off that horse yesterday." His gray eyes searched hers, looking for doubt or regret and finding neither. "Violet, you have been through hell. I do not want to take advantage. You are not taking advantage. I am choosing this. I am choosing you." She kissed him again, softer this time but no less meaningful. "You promised I would not face them alone. Well, I am promising the same to you. Whatever comes next, we face it together." Something fierce and possessive flashed across his face. Together. The sound of horses approaching made them spring apart, both reaching for weapons before they recognized Marshal Brennan's voice calling out from the road. Asher moved to the door, keeping his rifle ready until he confirmed the marshal was alone, saw the vultures circling. Brennan dismounted and surveyed the scene with the practiced eye of a lawman. "Looks like the Garrett gang picked the wrong ranch to attack. They will live to stand trial." Asher gestured to the prisoners. "Though Jack might need a doctor before we transport him back to town." The marshal walked the line of bound men, his expression grim. "Jack Garrett, Illy Garrett, Samuel Garrett, and Diego Ruiz. That is $20,000 in bounty money right there, maybe more given the warrants out of Kansas and Missouri." He turned to Asher with something approaching respect. "You did the territory a service today, Dalton. Miss Warren deserves as much credit as I do." She shot Ruiz when he tried to breach the house. Brennan's eyebrows rose as he looked at Violet standing in the doorway, still pale but composed. "That right, Miss Warren. You shot one of the most dangerous gunfighters in 3 territories. I shot a man who was trying to kill us." Violet's voice was steady now, the shock fading into a different kind of resolve. "And I would do it again if I had to." The marshal nodded slowly. "Well then, I reckon that makes you a credible witness when we bring these boys to trial for Judge Hamilton's murder. You willing to testify?" "I am." This time she did not hesitate, did not consider running. "I will tell everything I saw that night in Dodge City. Every detail." It took most of the morning to get the prisoners loaded onto horses and ready for transport back to Canon City. The Mexican gunfighter, Ruiz, had to be carried on a travois fashioned from branches and blankets, his leg wound serious enough that Brennan was not sure he would make the journey. Jack Garrett drifted in and out of consciousness, the shotgun blast having torn through his shoulder and upper chest. The doctor would have his work cut out for him. Asher and Violet watched them ride away, the marshal and his 2 deputies forming an armed escort around their dangerous cargo. Only when they had disappeared around the bend in the road did Violet allow herself to relax, the tension draining from her shoulders all at once. "It is really over." She spoke it like a prayer, hardly daring to believe. "They cannot hurt me anymore. It is over." Asher's arm came around her waist, solid and warm. "You are safe now. We both are." They stood there for a long moment, surveying the ranch. Bullet holes scarred the walls, broken glass littered the porch, and the front door would need to be replaced entirely. But the structure was sound, the damage repairable, Everything could be fixed with time and effort. I should get back to town. Violet said it reluctantly, not really wanting to leave but unsure what else she should do. I need to collect my things from my room, and I should probably find somewhere else to stay until the trial. Or, Asher turned her to face him, his hands settling on her waist in a way that was becoming familiar. You could stay here. Her heart skipped. Asher, I know we only just met. I know this is fast and probably foolish, and a dozen other things people would say if they knew. His gray eyes held hers with that same intensity that had struck her in town. But I meant what I said earlier. I want to face whatever comes next with you, together. People will talk. A woman living on a ranch with a man who is not her husband. Then marry me. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and perfect and terrifying all at once. Violet's mouth opened, but no sound came out, her mind racing through 1,000 objections, and finding that none of them mattered as much as the feeling in her chest when she looked at him. That is crazy. She managed to find her voice. We have known each other less than 2 days. I have known you long enough to see your courage, long enough to see your strength, long enough to know that I could spend the rest of my life getting to know you better and count myself the luckiest man alive. He pulled her closer, until there was no space left between them. I am not saying we need to get married tomorrow. Court me properly if you want. Let me take you to church socials and walk you home in the evenings. But I am asking you to consider a future here with me, building something together. Violet thought about the months of running, the loneliness that had become her constant companion, the feeling of having no place in the world to call home. Then she thought about the way Asher had stepped between her and danger without hesitation, the way he held her when she cried, the way he kissed her like she was precious and strong all at once. Ask me again in 3 months. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips. Court me properly. Let me get to know you without outlaws trying to kill us, and if you still want me then, ask me again. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise, warm and bright and full of promise. I can do that. And fair warning, Miss Violet Warren, I am going to spend those 3 months making sure you fall as hard for me as I have fallen for you. I think you might be too late for that. She kissed him softly, a promise of things to come. I think I started falling the moment you said I would not face them alone. The trial of the Garrett gang was the biggest thing to happen in Canon City in years. People came from all over Colorado territory to watch, packing the courthouse until standing room was scarce. Violet testified for 3 hours, recounting everything she had seen that night in Dodge City. And when the defense attorney tried to discredit her testimony, Marshal Brennan produced her signed statement from the sheriff in Dodge City corroborating every detail. Jack Garrett and his brothers were sentenced to hang. Diego Ruiz, who had survived his leg wound against all odds, received 20 years in prison for his part in the attack on Asher's ranch. The judge, a stern-faced man from Denver, commended Violet for her bravery and Asher for his service in bringing dangerous criminals to justice. But the real vindication came when Judge Hamilton's widow approached Violet outside the courthouse after the verdict was read. "Thank you." The older woman's eyes were red from crying, but her voice was strong. "Thank you for not letting them get away with what they did. My husband was a good man, and he deserved justice." Violet took her hands, squeezing gently. "He tried to protect me, even at the end. I owed it to him to make sure the truth came out." Mrs. Hamilton nodded, then pressed something into Violet's palm. When Violet looked down, she saw it was a gold locket. "My husband gave this to me on our wedding day. I want you to have it, to remember that your courage made a difference." Violet tried to refuse, but the widow would not hear of it. So she accepted the gift with tears in her eyes, tucking it into her pocket where it rested close to her heart. True to his word, Asher courted her properly over the following months. He came to town every Sunday to take her to church, sitting beside her in the pew with his hat in his hands and his shoulder pressed against hers. He took her on picnics by the Arkansas River, where they talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and dreams and fears. He taught her to ride better, putting her up on a gentle mare and showing her how to move with the horse rather than against it. And he kissed her, often and thoroughly, until she was dizzy with want and anticipation for the life they would build together. Violet continued working as a seamstress, taking on commissions from the wealthier families in Canon City. But now she worked with a lightness in her heart, without the constant fear of looking over her shoulder. She made friends with the other women in town, attended quilting circles and church socials, and began to feel like she belonged somewhere for the first time since her parents died. 3 months to the day after the trial ended, Asher showed up at her door on a Sunday morning with a small box in his hand and a nervous expression on his face. "Walk with me." He offered his arm and she took it, letting him lead her down to the river where cottonwood trees provided shade from the late summer sun. The water rushed past, clear and cold from mountain snowmelt, and dragonflies darted over the surface in flashes of blue and green. Violet Warren. Asher turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. 3 months ago, I asked you to give me time to prove myself worthy of you. I have tried my best to show you that I am a man who keeps his promises, who will protect you and cherish you and build a life with you. So I am asking again, here in front of God and this river and these mountains. He dropped to one knee, opening the box to reveal a simple gold band. Will you marry me? Violet's vision blurred with tears, but they were happy tears, the kind that came from joy too big to contain. Yes. Yes. 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto her finger and then he was standing, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around while she laughed and cried and kissed him all at once. When he finally set her down, they were both breathing hard, grinning at each other like fools in love. I was so afraid you would say no. Asher pressed his forehead to hers, his hands cupping her face. I know I do not have much to offer, just a small ranch and a lot of hard work and a heart that belongs entirely to you. That is everything I need. Violet kissed him softly. You are everything I need. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church on Main Street, with Marshal Brennan standing as witness and half the town crowding into the pews to watch. Violet wore a dress she had sewn herself, pale blue cotton with lace at the collar, and carried wildflowers picked from the meadow near the ranch. Asher wore his best suit, his dark hair freshly cut, and his boots polished until they shone. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Asher kissed her with a sweetness that made her heart ache, his lips moving against hers with reverent devotion. The congregation applauded and someone started playing a fiddle, and suddenly they were being swept out of the church and into a celebration that lasted until well after dark. But eventually they managed to slip away, riding back to the ranch under a sky full of stars. Asher carried her over the threshold, even though she laughingly protested that she could walk just fine, and set her down in the middle of the main room that was now their home. Welcome home, Mrs. Dalton. He spoke her new name like a prayer, like something sacred and precious. Home. Violet tested the word, finding it fit perfectly. Yes, this is home now. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that left them both breathless and marveling. Asher was gentle despite his obvious desire, taking his time to learn what made her gasp and shiver and cry out his name. Violet gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back, trusting him with her body the way she had already trusted him with her life. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed they would now share, skin against skin, heartbeat against heartbeat. "I love you." Asher whispered it into her hair, his arms wrapped around her in the darkness. "I think I loved you from the moment I caught you in that street, but I definitely knew it when you stood beside me at that window ready to fight. I love you too." Violet turned in his embrace so she could see his face, even in the dim starlight filtering through the window. "You gave me back my life. You gave me a reason to stop running and start living. I will spend the rest of my days showing you what that means to me." He kissed her again, slow and deep, and then they made love once more with the unhurried certainty of two people who knew they had all the time in the world. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. The ranch prospered under their joint efforts, Violet proving to have a knack for the business side of running cattle, while Asher handled the physical work. They expanded the herd, built a larger barn, and even hired a hand to help with the heavier tasks. In the spring of 1880, Violet gave birth to their first child, a son they named Samuel after Asher's father. He came into the world squalling and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and his father's gray eyes. Asher cried when he held his son for the first time, cradling the tiny body against his chest with wonder written across his face. "He is perfect." His voice was thick with emotion. "You are perfect. I cannot believe how lucky I am." Violet, exhausted but elated, reached up to touch his face. "We made him together, out of love and hope and all the good things we fought so hard to protect." 2 years later came a daughter, Emily, with her mother's green eyes and a sunny disposition that brightened even the hardest days. Then another son, Jacob, stubborn and determined from the moment he took his first breath. The house that had once seemed adequate for two people burst at the seams with family, with love, with the noise and chaos of children growing up wild and free in the Colorado high country. Violet never forgot where she came from, the fear and desperation that had driven her to Canon City all those years ago. Sometimes, late at night when Asher was asleep beside her and the children were tucked safely in their beds, she would take out the locket Mrs. Hamilton had given her and remember Judge Hamilton's kind face, the way he had tried to protect her even as he lay dying. And she would give thanks for the chain of events that had led her here, to this life, to this man, to this family. Yes, it had started with violence and terror, but it had grown into something beautiful, something worth every moment of fear she had endured. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Asher took her back to that spot by the river where he had proposed, leaving the children with a neighbor for the afternoon. They sat beneath the same cottonwood trees, older now and marked by time but still standing strong. "You ever regret it?" Asher asked, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the water flow past. "Staying here with me instead of going somewhere safer, somewhere with less history?" Violet turned to look at him, seeing the gray at his temples now, the deeper lines around his eyes, but also seeing the man who had promised she would not face her enemies alone and kept that promise every day since. "I have never regretted it for a single moment." She kissed him, putting all her love and certainty into the gesture. "You are my home, Asher Dalton. You and our children and this life we built together. That is worth everything." He held her close, his chin resting on top of her head. "I am going to love you for the rest of my life." "That is a promise I intend to keep." "I know." And she did know, with the bone-deep certainty that came from years of living with someone, learning them inside and out. "And I am going to love you right back for just as long." They sat there until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, talking about their children's futures and the work that still needed to be done on the ranch, and all the small, ordinary things that made up a life. When they finally rode home, it was to find their children waiting on the porch, Samuel holding Emily's hand while Jacob ran circles around them with the boundless energy of a 5-year-old. "Papa! Mama!" The cry went up as soon as they were spotted, and suddenly Violet and Asher were surrounded by small bodies demanding attention and affection. They dismounted and gathered their children close, all of them together, a family forged in fire but tempered by love. That night, after the children were asleep and the dishes were washed and the ranch was quiet around them, Violet and Asher lay in their bed and held each other close. Through the window, they could see the stars wheeling overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first night together, the same mountains that had stood watch over their growing family. "Thank you." Violet whispered it into the darkness. "For everything. For being brave enough to step between me and those outlaws, for keeping your promise, for loving me." Asher's arms tightened around her. "Thank you for letting me, for trusting me with your heart, for building this life with me." He paused, then added softly, "And for not facing anything alone anymore. We are in this together always. Always." She agreed and sealed the promise with a kiss. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as all years do. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated births and mourned losses. Samuel grew into a young man much like his father, strong and steady and honest to his core. Emily developed her mother's gift with a needle and thread, creating beautiful things that she sold in town to save money for her future. Jacob, true to his stubborn nature, decided he wanted to be a lawman like Marshal Brennan and spent his teenage years learning everything he could about justice and the law. Violet's hair began to show silver at the temples, matching the gray in Asher's, and their hands grew more calloused from work, but also more practiced at reaching for each other in the night. They never lost the passion that had sparked between them during those desperate early days, but it deepened into something richer, something that came from knowing another person completely and choosing them anyway, every single day. When Canon City celebrated its incorporation as an official town in 1886, Violet and Asher were honored as two of the original settlers who had helped build the community. They stood on the platform in the town square, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends and friends who had become family, and listened to the mayor talk about vision and perseverance and the American dream. But when Asher looked at Violet, she knew he was not thinking about any of that. He was remembering a young woman running for her life, a cowboy making a promise, and the choice they had both made to face the darkness together rather than letting it divide them. "I would do it all again," he told her later that night as they walked home from the celebration. "Every moment, every risk, every second of fear, all of it, just to end up here with you. So would I." Violet squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses that matched her own, the strength that had never wavered in all their years together. "1,000 times over, I would choose you." Their children grew up and found loves of their own. Samuel married a rancher's daughter from the next valley over and started his own spread, determined to build something for his future family the way his father had. Emily fell in love with a teacher who came to Canon City from Boston, a gentle man with a passion for education who treated her like she hung the moon. Jacob, true to his dream, became a deputy marshal and eventually took over when old Brennan finally retired. Violet and Asher became grandparents, then great-grandparents, their house always full of visiting children and the noise of family. They taught the younger generation about the history of the ranch, about the importance of standing up for what was right even when it was dangerous, about the power of love to transform everything it touched. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought people from all over the territory. There was food and music and dancing, stories told and retold until they took on the polish of legend. But the moment Violet treasured most came late in the evening, when Asher pulled her aside and led her out to the porch where they could be alone. 40 years. He shook his head in wonder, his hair now completely silver, his face deeply lined but his gray eyes still as sharp and loving as ever. 40 years since I married the bravest woman I have ever known. 40 years since you saved my life. Violet leaned against him, fitting perfectly into his side the way she always had. And every day since then has been a gift I never take for granted. He turned her in his arms, holding her the way he had on their wedding night, with reverence and passion and unwavering devotion. I meant what I said back then. I love you more now than I did on the day we married, more than I did yesterday, more than I will tomorrow, because somehow this feeling just keeps growing. Violet touched his face, tracing the familiar features she knew better than her own. You promised I would not face them alone. That was the moment everything changed. That was when I knew you were someone special, someone worth loving for the rest of my life. And I have kept that promise. His voice was fierce, full of all the love and commitment that had sustained them through 4 decades together. Every day, every challenge, every moment of joy and sorrow. You have never faced anything alone, and you never will as long as I draw breath. I know. She kissed him, soft and sweet and full of a lifetime of memories. And I have kept my promise too. We have faced it all together, just like we said we would. Inside the house, someone struck up a waltz on the piano and their children began calling for them to dance. Asher took Violet's hand and led her back inside, and they moved together across the floor with the practiced ease of 2 people who had spent 40 years learning each other's rhythms. Around them, their family watched and smiled, seeing the love that had built everything they knew, everything they were. When the party finally ended and the last guests had departed, Violet and Asher stood together on their porch watching the stars wheel overhead. The ranch was quiet now, settled into the peace of night, but it thrummed with life and love and all the years of work and dedication they had poured into it. You know what I am most proud of? Asher asked, his arm around her waist holding her close. What is that? We took something that started in violence and fear, and we turned it into this, into love and family and a legacy that will last generations. He gestured at the ranch, at the mountains beyond, at the life they had built together. That is what I am most proud of. Not just that we survived, but that we thrived. Violet nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. We could have let the fear win. We could have stayed strangers, could have gone our separate ways after the trial, but we chose each other instead. We chose love. Best choice I ever made. He kissed the top of her head. Come on, Mrs. Dalton. Let us go to bed. We have got grandchildren visiting tomorrow, and you know they will be up with the sun. They went inside together, hand in hand, closing the door on another day in a lifetime of days. And as they settled into their bed, into the warmth and comfort of each other's arms, Violet thought about how far they had come from that desperate afternoon in Canon City, when she had been running for her life. She thought about the cowboy who had caught her, who had promised she would not face her enemies alone, who had kept that promise every day since. She thought about the love that had grown between them, starting as a spark in the darkness and becoming a fire that had warmed them through every storm. And she gave thanks, as she did every night, for the courage to trust a stranger, for the strength to stand and fight, and for the love that had transformed everything. I love you. She whispered it into the darkness, feeling Asher's heartbeat steady against her back where he held her close. I love you too. His voice was already thick with sleep, but the words were as clear and true as they had been on their wedding day. Always and forever, Violet. Always and forever. She closed her eyes, safe and loved and home, and let sleep take her, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring more of the same. More love, more family, more life built on the foundation of a promise kept. You will not face them alone. Those words had changed everything, had saved her life and given her a future she could never have imagined. And as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, surrounded by the evidence of their love in every corner of their home, Violet Warren Dalton knew with absolute certainty that some promises were worth everything. Some promises changed the world. And the promise Asher had made to her that day in Canon City had changed hers completely, transforming fear into courage, loneliness into love, and desperation into a hope that would last forever. The end came peacefully for both of them, as it should for people who had lived good lives full of love and purpose. Asher passed first, on a quiet spring morning with Violet holding his hand and their children gathered around the bed. His last words were the same ones he had spoken so many times before. I love you. You never had to face anything alone. Violet followed him 6 months later, her heart simply giving out in her sleep as though it had decided it was time to join its other half. She was buried beside Asher on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a cottonwood tree that shaded their graves from the summer sun. Their children carved a simple inscription on the shared headstone. Together, always. 1858-1920 and 1856-1920. They faced everything side by side. The ranch continued on through their children and grandchildren, each generation adding their own chapter to the story, but never forgetting the foundation on which it was built. They told the tale around dinner tables and campfires, about the woman who had witnessed a murder and the cowboy who had promised to protect her, about the love that had grown from that desperate beginning into something that lasted a lifetime. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light slanted golden across the Colorado high country, people swore they could see two figures walking hand in hand by the creek, an older couple moving with the ease of long familiarity, still together even after death, still keeping the promise that had started it all. You will not face them alone. It was more than words. It was a vow, a commitment, a love that transcended time and circumstance. And in the end, it was the only thing that really mattered.